All right, man. Let's go ahead and kick this off. So,
Good.
back on the podcast, I have Rob Saale, a former FBI special agent, 23 years, retired, right?
Yep.
Former director of the FBI's hostage fusion recovery cell, and now you're the owner, right? Or you're working at Star Risk Consulting.
Yeah, I am the owner and proprietor of Star Risk Consulting.
Awesome, awesome. How's the consultation business nowadays?
It, believe it or not, with COVID going on, it's actually still doing pretty good. So
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. I can
a
imagine.
lot of uncertainty in the world that people are looking for some help on security assessments and what have you. So
Yeah.
staying busy.
Oh, I bet. Oh, that's the best thing you can do right now. I think that's a problem a lot of people are having is they have too much time on their hands, or they're locked down, so they're just sitting around. It's unhealthy. It's not good.
Yeah.
For the people that are tuning in, or the people that are listening to this podcast, if you haven't listened to the first episode with Rob, it's episode 70, and I had you on originally because I was reading an article in the Marine Corps Times about Austin Tice, who was a Marine infantry officer, and he decided to get out of the Marine Corps, went to school for a little bit, became a journalist, and went overseas to Syria to report on what was going on over there, and was kidnapped or captured. And the U.S. government or his family they correct me if I'm wrong, they both believe that he may still be alive and that they're working to get him back. So, yeah, if for the listeners, if you haven't checked that one out, go back and listen to that episode, because today I'm going to have, Rob's going to come on and give us an update, maybe on the case and stuff, and maybe how the new administration, if anything changes with this, because things do shift with administrations and stuff like that. So we can go through that. So, however you want to kick it off, Rob, if you just want to start your update.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of an update, there's not a whole
Mm-hmm.
lot. The I do think there's some positive things with the new administration coming in. One of the things the new administration decided to do is retain the special presidential envoy for hostage affairs from the Trump administration. So Roger Carstens is going to stay on as the SPIHA going forward. So that has a degree of continuity. Um, and so you don't have that sort of interruption or halt to how things um, were being conducted before. Um, so it remains to be seen. I haven't really heard a lot on what the Biden administration's Syria policy is going to be. It seems to be right now they're just kind of continuing the status quo, but um, that'll definitely play a factor in how things proceed going forward. Is how the new administration decides to address the Syrian regime over
Yeah,
there.
for sure. That's one of those things. Like, that area is so crazy. Like, I don't know. We'll see what the administration does. I don't know if I have a lot of. It seemed like the Trump administration was trying to pull out of that area. Pull out of Afghanistan, basically pull out of a lot of the war zones we were in. And a lot of people don't have as much faith in the Biden administration to continue that. But you never know. You never know what's going to happen. Can you? Can you kind of talk about why the government and his family thinks that he might still be alive after it's been 7 years, right, at this point, or 7 or 8 years?
Yeah, I there's some indicators that I can't go
Mm-hmm.
into because of their
Yeah.
intel driven, but we haven't had any indication that he's not alive. And so the family, as they well should, are continuing to continue to hope that he's going to be coming home in the near future, and they're doing everything in their power to try to make that happen and working every possible avenue. And same with the U.S. government. So the hostage recovery fusion cell continues to work it. It's an active case. The FBI has an active investigation going going forward on Austin, and the the special presidential envoy for hostage affairs. It's still a top priority to that matter and addressing that with the Syrian
I
regime.
feel like the U.S. does a pretty good job of advocating for their citizens that are locked up abroad, or maybe hostages or maybe locked up and stuff like that. Can you tell us about kind of like what the process is like, as being the former director of the hostage fusion recovery cell? Can you kind of tell us what the process, what kind of happens once you find out that there's an American that has been captured overseas or has been locked up in an overseas prison or jail?
Sure. Well, generally, there's some sort of notification, and that could come through one of several means. Either someone notifies the U.S. Embassy forward. Somebody may notify the State Department directly. Somebody may call into the FBI field office. May pass that along, or we may find out about it through the media. Um, once that, if it is a hostage taking case, an American that's either kidnapped by a criminal group or by a terrorist organization, the FBI will open up an investigation, either a counterterrorism investigation or a criminal investigation into the matter. And then, the wheels of government start turning. The hostage recovery fusion cell is notified, and then they'll make notifications to all the other government entities that are out there that may have some interest or be able to assist. And those are, all the intel community, DoD, other law enforcement agencies, and just try to leverage any possible avenue that you can utilize to obtain the safe recovery of an individual. Um, so then, once that case is opened up, they'll start doing an analysis of the case, trying to find out who's got the U.S. citizen, what's their objective in kidnapping them. Are they trying to get a ransom? Are they trying to make a political statement? Things of that nature. And then with the hostage recovery fusion cell, they start pulling all the involved players together to come up with a recovery strategy. And that recovery strategy can, run the gamut from diplomatic means and diplomatic engagement, use of third-party intermediaries, non-government actors, or on the other end of the spectrum, you have like a kinetic option, which is using the military or other foreign law enforcement or militaries to do some form of a hostage rescue.
I assume I
So
assume the hostage rescue portion, like sending in, one of our tier one assets to go rescue somebody or a group overseas, is probably one of the last options, right? Like we're trying to figure out everything
yeah,
else before that.
yeah, you don't want to put anyone in harm's way unless you absolutely have to. So it's you're trying to, again, use whatever means are possible. And the thing with Presidential Policy Directive 30, PPD 30, which was enacted several years ago, it now gives the U.S. government the latitude to engage with um, non-state actors or terrorist organizations. No concessions does not mean no negotiation. So we can negotiate with those actors or individuals either directly or through third parties to try to convince them that it's really not in their best interest to keep an American
Yeah, for
hostage.
sure. Have you ever run into an issue where the family didn't think that you're working hard enough, so they try to speak directly to the terrorists or negotiate directly with them or hostage takers?
Uh, well, you run into issues where the family, it's it's probably one of the most difficult dynamics you can have is when someone's loved one is taken hostage
Yeah.
overseas. There's a feeling of there's not a whole lot you can do, and as a parent or loved one, you feel somewhat helpless. So you're always pushing the government to do everything it can. Um, Families will often seek outside guidance or advice from either different policy experts or regional experts, what have you. And they're and sometimes those are in contrast with what the U.S. government policy is towards that region or actor. So you get moments where there are contentious, back and forth between family members and the government. But you try to work through those as best you can. And families will may try to reach out, but we try to discourage that and basically trying to keep all the efforts in one basket, so we don't have the bad guys on the other end aren't confused with who they're dealing with. They're dealing with the united front, the families, the U.S. government working together.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you don't want to have like competing narratives that are being broadcast and stuff like that. You're right, man. I can't imagine what that would be like for a family, just to not know. I mean, just to know that their kid has been taken hostage, and then after that, I mean, they're just dealing with a massive amount of unknown. It's such an unfortunate thing like that. Is this something that's like, the hostage recovery fusion cell? Can you kind of talk about what exactly that is? And is that something that comes together when there's a case, or is that something that's always going? There's always cases to be worked on, kind of deal.
Yeah, it's something that's always going. It's an interagency body. It's got it doesn't belong to the FBI. It belongs to the U.S. government. Just happens that an FBI agent is as the director, but there's also senior representation from DOD and Department of State. So there's a number of buckets that really the fusion cell works out of. Family engagement is one. So there are State Department consular services personnel, FBI victim specialists. We have psychologists that are assigned to the cell that help in supporting the families, but also in once a victim is recovered, in providing post kidnapping or post hostage support to that individual. There's a external engagement section of the cell that reaches out to other third parties, religious organizations, NGOs, anyone who could be of assistance, and also to work with them in prevention of hostage taking. So, kind of providing them with advice and guidance on areas they should go to or, shouldn't go to, some best practices, things to avoid. There's an intel component that works to coordinate the efforts of all the intel community within the U.S. government. And then there's an operational part that works with the FBI, DOD, other law enforcement entities to try to develop, work the case, bring everybody together, develop a recovery strategy for the individual. So all those components are all housed together. It's like I said, an interagency. So there's representatives from over 23 different government agencies there. So the idea behind it is to avoid stovepipes like you may have seen in the past, and really facilitate information sharing and be transparent across the board. So it's an open book with all the agencies, where everybody working together to try to do what's best to bring an American citizen home.
When did the organization come together, and was it created because of previous issues with like stovepiping or something like that, or was it something that was just identified as a need of this joint work between all the agencies?
Yeah. So after the 4 Americans were killed over in Syria by ISIS in 2012, 2013 timeframe. There was a lot of finger pointing and issues with lack of intel sharing, lack of sharing information with the families, being inconsistent in dealing with the families. And so under the Obama administration, they did a study which was originally supposed to take about 90 days. It ended up taking about 9 months. And from that study, PPD 30, Presidential Policy Directive 30, was developed. And that policy basically stood up the U.S. hostage enterprise as it exists today. So there's several pieces to that. As former colleague of mine used to refer to it as the three-legged stool. So you have the hostage recovery fusion cell. You have the HRG, the hostage response group, which is chaired by the senior director for counterterrorism at the National Security Council, but it's a sub deputies level group that gets together, resolves policy issues, disagreements, helps approves recovery strategies. So that's at the NSC. That's really the policy and approval component. And then you have the special presidential envoy for hostage affairs. And that person it's now an ambassador level position, appointed by the president, approved by Congress. And that team is over at State Department, and they're really focused on diplomatic engagements and doing things that maybe regional country teams or ambassadors, therefore, may not have the capacity to do, may not be in a position to do, but that diplomatic engagement of pulling different entities together.
Yeah.
So those are the three components that came about. I go back, it's like 2014, 2015 timeframe. So it established that enterprise, and then it also laid out part of the PPD 30. It cleared up some issues with policy. So the no concessions policy. The U.S. government will not make concessions to terrorism, but or terrorist organizations. However, no concessions does not mean no negotiation. So it allowed the U.S. government, gave the latitude for the government to engage with those non-state actors or different organizations in order to facilitate and secure the release of American citizens.
Were you involved directly in like negotiations and stuff? And the reason I ask is because to me, like, it's hard to imagine talking to someone from another country or another organization like that and trying to be like, hey man, give us our dude back, like give us our American citizen back, and like trying to keep it diplomatic where, I don't know, it's like, can you talk through kind of the issues with doing a negotiation like that? Like, I can't imagine going into that and trying to be nice to someone who has kidnapped one of your citizens.
Now, I mean, so as the director of the fusion cell, my main job, I consider myself sort of a professional cat herder. I tried to keep everybody together and moving in the same direction. But in engaging with outside actors, it's like anything else. You just have to, compartmentalize that, put away any, animosity you have towards, anyone, any organizations or individuals, and just focus on, what the goal at hand is, and that's getting folks home. So there's, a lot of times we would look at an organization, and depending on where they were at or who they were, oftentimes at some point someone in the U.S. government dealt with them, or dealt with a country that deals with them. So the idea behind the engagement and that diplomatic engagement is to find the right person to make that. And it might be the special presidential envoy. It might be somebody that's out of government from a previous administration. It might be, somebody that is in business that has ties back to a certain country. Or it could be somebody that's, part of an NGO that maybe is doing humanitarian work in a certain region or country. But I think, one of the biggest difficulties we had is oftentimes that, when you're looking at an area like Afghanistan or Syria, there are regional considerations about those countries as well, and where U.S. policy is going. And so oftentimes, there'd be a conflict between what the policy folks wanted to do with a region, what they thought, and with with the hostage negotiation. So not engaging with the Syrian regime or not engaging with the Haqqani, um, might be in the better interest of the policy folks, looking at more broader national security issues. So those are just areas you had to kind of had to work through. But I will say this, and despite differing opinions about U.S. policy, I never ran into anybody in government that wasn't interested in somehow figuring out a way to get to yes and help get somebody home.
Yeah, and I guess that's the best thing you can hope for, in a situation like that. Do you
Yeah.
think the problem of like hostage taking or kidnapping of U.S. citizens or citizens in general is going to be worse in the future or less, not as bad?
I mean, hostage taking of U.S. citizens has been around since, you know, the the Washington, administration, when they had to deal with, pirates off of Tripoli and
Mm-hmm.
other places taking U.S. ships and individuals hostage. So hostage taking is going to be around. It's hostage taking has been a tactic that has been employed by both state actors and non-state actors for thousands of years. So I don't see it going away. Um, there are certain things the U.S. government may do to discourage hostage taking, and So I think what we've seen in the past is it sort of ebbs and flows, and that if someone gets whiff of the fact that there was a concession made, or they feel like an organization was able to achieve some goals as a result of taking an American hostage, well, word spreads quickly, and so then that kind of
Mm-hmm.
proliferates, and then until you get that genie back in the bottle again, and then you know go from there.
For
So
sure.
I think hostage taking is going to be around for a long
Yeah,
time.
it's just one of those things. Do you have any best practices that you can kind of pass along for anyone that may find themselves in that kind of situation where either they feel like they may be getting ready to be taken hostage or they have been taken hostage? Like, what's the best things that they can do to help you or someone that's in your role as, at the hostage recovery fusion cell, successfully come get them?
Yeah. Well, I think the best practice is
Yeah.
prevention. So, State Department puts out travel advisories all the time about certain regions. If you're going to go someplace that's questionable, do your homework. Um, look at, do you really need to go there? Follow the State Department advisories and guidelines. For anyone that's traveling anywhere internationally, I would enroll. State Department has a program. It's called STEP, and I believe the acronym is Safe Traveler Enrollment Program. But you can go to the State Department, their main website there, and you enroll, and basically all you're doing is putting in your itinerary. Hey, I'm going to be traveling to this country on these dates, and here's some contact information. Here's an email address, and what that gets you is, if you are traveling, and let's say you're in the Philippines and the volcano erupts, like happened last year in January, you'll start getting those advisories from the U.S. Embassy that this is what's going on. In the age of COVID now, they're constantly putting out advisories about various countries, what their policy is, if they've suddenly going to a curfew or something like that. You'll find out about that through that program. So I use it all the time when I go internationally overseas. Encourage anybody to use it, but prevention is the best thing you can do. And then if you do find yourself in a situation where you're taken hostage, just keep your wits about you. Stay calm. And uh, I the words I worked on the Jessica Buchanan case years ago, and she was an American that was working for an NGO over in Somalia and was taken hostage by a group of Somali pirates on land. but in she was eventually recovered as a result of a U.S. military rescue. And afterwards, you know, I met with her at the FBI headquarters, and one of the things she said to me is like, "Hey, I didn't know anybody even knew I was alive other than my dad until you know there were guys on the ground saying they're Jessica Buchanan, we're here, U.S. military, we're here to rescue you." So the one thing is the U.S. government. I think you mentioned it earlier. The U.S. government will do more than any other government um, than I've come across to bring its citizens home safely.
I got kind of chills when you're talking about like her saying that, because I can't imagine that kind of situation where you don't know anything. And how long was she in captivity, or was she a hostage for?
She was a hostage for, I believe, almost 4 months. Maybe right at the 4 month
That's
mark.
crazy. 4 months. 4 months of not knowing anything other than she knew her dad knew that she had been taken captive, but outside of that, just I mean, man, I can't imagine the mind games that has to go on when you're going through an issue like that. So it's probably, I mean, obviously a great thing that you guys have the psychologists and stuff on staff to help them out with those things. Um, that's just so crazy. When we used to go, I was on the MU, the Marine Expeditionary Unit, which is when you do a deployment on ship in the Marines, and we would go to all these different countries: Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, like all this stuff. And every time we went to a country, we always got a country brief. And I guess I kind of take it for granted, like the stuff that you would learn while you're in the military, or that the information that they would pass along to you to keep you safe. Because, sorry, I keep looking down because my dog is walking around. He's about to knock my light over. He got up. But what I was saying was, I take it for granted because they give you these briefs. Like when we would go to Hong Kong, they would tell you like specific areas, like, hey, these are the dangerous areas. These are the areas where people are getting mugged. These are people getting pickpocketed. These are where like the prostitutes and stuff are hanging out. Don't go there. They probably should have told some dudes that, but um,
Right.
but it's like you learn these things in the military, and you can just kind of whatever, like take it for granted. And it's kind of weird to think about just regular people traveling overseas and knowing a lot of regular people. Obviously, it's like I doubt very many of them got as much detailed information like we did before we would go step foot into a country for just like 3 or 4 days to go decompress a little bit off ship and drink and stuff. So yeah, it's like, I don't know. For me, having been to a bunch of different weird places, I mean, we were in Malaysia and Sabah, and while we were down there doing prepping for an exercise, me and another guy were down there just setting up, doing the meetings and stuff like that. We had to have like armed guards with us whenever we would go out and stuff. And it's like moving around in a dangerous area like that. Even there, I felt pretty safe. It almost seems like to me, like I wouldn't go down a dark, sketchy looking alleyway in Los Angeles at night. So I'm not going to do that shit
Right.
in Malaysia, And it
Yeah.
seems like that's like the biggest thing. Like a little bit of common sense will take you a long way when you're overseas. Like people have these adverse like reactions or fears of like certain countries or certain areas, but it's like they're not always as dangerous as you think, as long as you just use common sense.
No, that's you're 100% right. I mean, that's the biggest thing is don't make yourself into a target, and don't make yourself into a victim. So, like you said, don't be going down, you know, into a bad neighborhood, or what would be a sketchy neighborhood at night, or traveling by yourself, or thinking it's okay to leave the hotel to go on foot and walk a half mile away into a area where you heard there was this cool restaurant or something, something like that. I, I think most people that are taken hostage overseas, the vast majority are they're criminal kidnappings where somebody is trying to just, it's either an express kidnapping, they're trying to get a little bit of money in a short amount of time, or it's they've been surveilling and assessing a target for a period of time. So if you're just a quick hit, in and out of a country or something like that, that not a lot of people know you're coming there. People don't know your itinerary, things like that. Those are good
Hmm.
things you want to avoid.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think being an American citizen kind of gives you a little bit of? Do you think that kind of pushes some hostage takers away from like, because they know that that the U.S. government's going to do something about it, either negotiations or they're going to send in, a tier one team to come rescue these people. Do you think the threat of that on its own is a good deterrent?
I think in some cases, being an American citizen puts a bullseye
Mm.
on your back. Because especially if you're dealing with a terrorist organization that wants to get across a political message or seek some sort of policy change, um, then they're going to want to take an
Hmm.
American. If you're and also looking at if even in a matter like a criminal matter, we see Americans being taken hostage all the time down in Mexico and South and Central America. It's just by the basis of being an American, they know that you have money or a lot more money than
Yeah.
they do, and can pay a ransom. And some of the criminal kidnappings that we dealt with, there were ransoms that were it'd be $100 and a 20-year-old pickup truck was what they wanted for a ransom, um, and how those criminal cases got resolved. So the bar was not really as high as you might think or you might see in the movies regarding what kind of ransoms are demanded for
Yeah.
hostages.
Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit and kind of talk about your career cuz on the last episode you mentioned, and I don't think we really got into it, that you were in the army before you joined the FBI, and that you were also a UH-60 pilot. So, can you talk
Yes.
about one, why you decided to join the army, and how your path went to becoming a helicopter pilot? Is that what you wanted to be?
Yeah. So I wanted to fly helicopters. My dad was a master chief in the Navy, and I knew I wanted to pursue some form of military career, at least
Mm-hmm.
initially. And so I wanted to fly helicopters, and I was looking at the Navy. And then one day, he just said to me, he goes, "Hey, if you want to fly helicopters, go in the branch of service that has the most of them and does it the best, and that's the Army." And so that's the way I went. I got an Army ROTC scholarship. Went straight out of college. I was actually a medical service corps officer, but I was tracked straight to flight school. So medevac, and I don't know how it is now, but back then there was an aviation branch, but medevac helicopters and medevac units were led by medical service corps officers who had been through
Oh,
flight
okay.
school.
What year was this?
So that would be
Oh man.
87. Yeah.
Way back. No, I'm just playing.
So, that was
What a great time though,
yeah.
man! Being a helicopter pilot. Like I imagine. Are you still a pilot? Do you maintain your license? Do you still fly?
I haven't flown in several years, but it's like riding a bike. I went from I think I was 9 years out of after I left the army when I flew for the bureau for a couple of
Oh,
years.
really?
So I picked it right up. But yeah, that was back in the day. I went back in the days of there was no
Mm-hmm.
GPS. The most sophisticated nav system we had on a Blackhawk was a Doppler um, uh, nav system, and you're flying. Cutaway goggles were fairly NVGs were fairly new, um, so it was kind of crazy time, and flying at night was sort of just the Army was starting to come into its own and do that. I remember we'd go out. I was stationed in Korea for a while. We'd go out to support the Marines coming in for Team Spirit and go out and get deck landing qualled, and they wanted us to have nothing to do with using NVGs around.
Oh, hello. Hey, Rob, you still there?
Yep, I'm here.
I think I lost you just for a second. You said that you would go to ship and get deck walls, and that the Navy had nothing for you. They didn't want you using NVGs. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, they didn't want us using MVGs around the ship. So
Why is that?
I think it was they were afraid that we were going to crash a helicopter into one of their boats.
Man, what a
like I said, NVGs are relatively new back then. They're really
I can't imagine, like, even MVGs now are they're good, but they're not great. So I can't imagine what it was like flying, at night on like Gen 1, night vision goggles. Like, I don't know. Can you kind of talk about I've talked to a few pilots, and night flying is something that terrifies a lot of guys, especially helicopter pilots if they're flying low level flights.
right. So when I came in, they were just starting to field the Anvis 6, which were the sort of the next generation 2 or generation 3 of night vision
Mm-hmm.
goggles. But we still trained with the Anvis 5s, which were um, pretty heavy. You had to have like a 3 pound weight on the
Oh,
back of
the
your helmet to
counterweight.
counter the counter as a
Yep.
counterweight. And talking, there were guys that flew um, with the full face goggles. So we were flying with cutaways. They had modified the goggles, the Ambus 5s, as cutaways, but guys that originally they started flying with full face, where the goggles were sort of molded to your face there, and they would have one tube focused at 12 inches so they could read the instruments, and the other tube was focused out at infinity. So you're really just flying with
That's crazy.
on one eye, and yeah, it was nuts. But
You probably felt like kings of the world flying around like that, though. You get done with a flight, man. That's insane.
yeah, there was some scary stuff, and we didn't Flear wasn't really it was the special ops community was utilizing Flear, but we didn't have it.
It was very basic
So
then
yeah,
too. I think back in '80s, early '90s, Flear looking through a Flear at a person was probably like looking at a blob, rather than
yeah,
like an actual shape or some of the detail that we have on our Gen 4 pods, and I think they're up to like Gen 5 pods now or something. I don't even know, but
it was a lot of and you didn't really have a nav, so you were trying to navigate off a folded up map, and it was a lot of work, and I'm sure it's just as much work now. It's just a different type of workload.
oh, for sure. Yeah, I bet. Yeah, it's crazy because I saw the old like if you look at the old Cobras, the whiskeys, and how they were laid out compared to the Zulus. And the Zulus now are just all electronic. Like if you look at the control panels and stuff like that, it's all
Yeah,
electronic. The front seater doesn't have like the how he would have to look down and stuff. There's just a technology that we have in these aircraft now. I mean, I'm sure if someone like you that was used to flying, back in the 80s and 90s, came and jump into a very like brand new helicopter, it'd probably blow your mind about what the helicopter takes care of for you.
yeah, it really would. When my last assignment in the Army, I was working um, at on the UH-60Q model, which was a predecessor to sort of the modern medevac. So it was trying to incorporate some of the things that were out there in the special ops community. So advanced navigation system that used GPS and INS, and then it had a Flear on it, external hoist, some things like that. And one of my last things was to take it out to San Antonio for a conference out there. And I remember, if you haven't ever heard of him, somebody to certainly look up, but Michael Novosel.
Mm-mm.
He was a medevac pilot in Vietnam who won the Medal of Honor, but had a real interesting career. He flew in the Army Air Corps in World War II. I think he flew B-26s or something like that. And then he flew in Korea, was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. And then time he wanted to go to Vietnam, the Air Force told him he was too old. So he basically resigned his commission in the Air Force and joined the Army as a warrant
Oh
officer.
wow.
and flew helicopters. And both he and his son were in the flew medevac during the war, and he won the Medal of Honor. But this was in I believe it was early 95 when I was doing the static display, and they asked me to, they brought him out, and he was sort of a god amongst the medevac community. Here's this guy who won the CMH, and he came out, and we sat him in the seat up front, and I powered up the aircraft, and I was showing him, the INS and Flear and everything else, and all these senior ranking guys are sitting in the back looking over our shoulders. And when I finished, he looks at me and he says, "Captain," he goes, "this aircraft's a piece of shit." And I was like, yeah, I was horrified. He saw the horrified look on my face, and he goes, "You know why this is a piece of shit?" And I said, "Sir, please tell me, what can we do to make it better?" And he goes, "You can't drink whiskey and fly this plane."
Oh my.
And then he went in and told me a story about after World War II, he and a guy had flown a B-26, on like an 11-hour flight, and finished off a bottle of Jack Daniels, and still, were able to get the plane on the ground and stuff. But
different times.
Yeah.
For sure. So what, as a medevac pilot, what was your least favorite kind of mission to go on, and what was your favorite kind of mission to go on?
Well, any medevac missions, they were really, there's into three classifications. So you have urgent, priority, and routine. And like a routine patient transfer, it's just like hauling cargo somewhere, from point to point. The missions you really liked are, an urgent medevac where you had to fly out somewhere, maybe lower a medic down on a hoist, bring somebody up into the aircraft and get them, to definitive care, as soon as possible. Because it was that, loss of, if you didn't get them to definitive care within 2-hour window, they were, the threat of loss of life, limb was there. Mm-hmm. So flying those were always the most exciting. You're on alert, and you could be sleeping in your bunk, and all of a sudden the phone rings, and then within 20 minutes, you're having to do a flight plan, get weather, get everything, get airborne and headed somewhere to pick somebody up.
Yeah, those technical rescues, man. I imagine the adrenaline going, when you're in the middle of one of those. I look at like the Coast Guard guys that do the rescues up in like Alaska and stuff like that, and some of the pilots and the rescue swimmers. And it's just amazing the stuff that they do, and then continue just to keep going out and doing that. I couldn't imagine like that kind of stress of, on all sides, flying the helicopter, holding it steady while you're hoisting in a storm, or whatever. These are all these things I guess regular people don't really think about.
Yeah. And, when I first got assigned, I first got branched in the medical service corps, I was disappointed. I wanted to fly gunships and, everything else. But I quickly found out that flying medevac as a commissioned officer, I flew probably 5 to 6 times more than my peers who were aviation officers that were commissioned. And the types of missions that you were flying on, oftentimes you were going out single ship. You weren't part of a big formation or anything, and you're going to a point on a map and trying to find somebody. They were very, very challenging. So I really enjoyed it.
So what made you decide to end your career in the Army and switch over to government service in the FBI?
Well, at the time it was in the the early 90s, 93, 94 time frame. The Army was drawn down. They were actually paying people to get out at the time. Mm-hmm. And my next assignment was, in all likelihood, I was a captain. My next assignment was probably going to be a ground assignment. And I really wasn't looking forward to it. So I started looking for flying jobs out there, looking at other, law enforcement organizations. And I just happened one day to be flying out of Fort Rucker, and I met a bureau pilot at a little airport there and down in Florida, and he happened to be the recruiter for the local field office. And he said, "Hey, if you're interested in joining the FBI, we're looking for pilots, foreign military guys right now. We're hiring. Here's my card." And I had never thought about the FBI part of that, but after I thought about it for about a week, and I gave him a call, and then he scheduled me for a test, and took that test and passed it, and then I had an interview and passed it, and within 6 months I was basically out of the Army and starting with the Bureau.
Being a helicopter pilot in the FBI is not something a lot of people would consider. It's not something you really think about, like, oh yeah, I guess it makes sense if they have helicopters, but not something that just kind of comes naturally to think. What kind of missions are the FBI using helicopters for? And what kind of helicopters specifically were you flying?
So I never flew helicopters for the FBI.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, when I came in, they were looking for people with those experiences. But I remember the first squad I got to, my supervisor told me, and I wanted to go down to at the time there was a tactical helicopter program down in Quantico that was supporting HRT, and they were flying at the time they were flying UH-1s, and I believe they had a couple of little birds, but I wanted to go down there, and my supervisor said, "Hey, you need to learn how to be a street agent before you do that." And there's a 2-year probationary period that I had to go on, and during that time I ended up getting on to SWAT and the tactical team, and found out that I actually liked working cases a lot, and just sort of got distracted from flying. And I didn't really fly until I was out in San Diego. I was at the office out there, and there was a shortage of pilots. They supported the surveillance mission the Bureau had, and I also had my fixed wing rating, so I got current on flying again, got up to speed, and I flew for a couple of years out there part time. So
that's kind of crazy that they want you to go be a field agent for 2 years before they'll let you fly. It's like just to even become a pilot at this point, you've been a pilot for years, so your skill level is obviously probably higher than the average person, because not only are you a pilot, but you're a pilot in the military where you're flying abnormal missions, more technical stuff like that. And the fact that they would want to pull you out of the cockpit to go be like, "Hey, go work on the street for a little bit first," is kind of crazy. Is that standard still? If you wanted to be a pilot, you'd have to go be a regular agent first, and then.
Well, I think there's the mindset of the Bureau has shifted somewhat, from back the way it was 20 years ago. Back then, it was, hey, agent. Everything was agent driven, agent first. So the case agent, the field agent, that was what drove the organization, and that's why they wanted you to cut your teeth doing that. I think today it's a little more lenient, to where there still is a probationary period, but they bring people in now, or at least they were a couple of years ago, with a tactical program where they're bringing in tier 1 and tier 2 guys, with those skill sets, and then sort of fast tracking them to go through HRT selection. Same with pilots. So the Bureau helicopter program, it's tactically to support Bureau operations. So either Bureau SWAT teams or HRT, mainly HRT. Mm-hmm. And then the Bureau has a whole nother, program which they use aircraft for surveillance. So they're doing, just a lot of helping follow people around on criminal cases, espionage cases, counterterrorism cases. Having an aircraft on it with a Flear, as an ISR platform, is a great resource to utilize.
Yeah, for sure. And for the people that don't know, ISR is the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platform. So, and that's basically what you'll call anything flying around with a camera on it nowadays. Almost, it seems like every platform, even your utility aircraft, have Flear and become their own ISR assets. You can use those as well.
Yep.
It's such a crazy time to be in that world. So you talk about you're on the ground for 2 years, and then you got an opportunity to go through the SWAT.
Yep.
Can you talk about what FBI SWAT is and compare that to what FBI HRT is, and maybe go through the differences and getting into one versus the other?
Sure. So the Bureau, the tactical program that the FBI has, you can really, I don't want to tier. I don't want to use the term tier to compare it to the military, but it sort of is on. You have HRT, which is a full-time, dedicated national asset, which is, hostage rescue is their primary mission, but they do all sorts of other things. High risk warrant service, assisting field offices. They have a NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical capability to operate in those types of denied environments, either for securing things, warrant service, what have you. And then below that, you have what they call the enhanced SWAT program. So the bigger field offices, back then there were 9 of them. They would have a bigger full-time SWAT teams, and those would be in the field office. Again, their primary mission is warrant service, assisting case agents with either arrest warrants or search warrants, high-risk arrest warrants or search warrants. Secondary mission of hostage rescue, helping supporting HRT, and then you had the smaller SWAT program. That has, I think it's sort of changed. You still have HRT, but now the SWAT program has become very technical, a lot of the standardized training and equipment and everything. So there's not a lot of discrepancy between a smaller office SWAT team and a larger office SWAT team in terms of the training they receive and the equipment they have compared to 20 years ago. But yeah, so being on SWAT when I was on, it was a collateral duty. We trained several times a month, so we had I believe it was 3 training days a month, and then generally in the summertime, you take a week or 2 weeks of training, and a lot of shooting, a lot of close quarter battle with working on warrant service, that type of stuff.
What kind of different guns were you getting your hands on? What were you trained on?
So initially back then it was we had MP5s, and we went from 9mm MP5s to 10mm MP5s, and then more began starting slowly back in late 90s, 2000s, start to go into M4s. And now I think everyone's pretty much exclusively with M4s. Handguns, there were SIG 9mm back early on, and then the Bureau developed its own Springfield 1911 pistol and 45 that we had for a while, and I think everybody has pretty much shifted over now to Glock 17s. 9mm are back in vogue.
Yeah, there's always the 9mm 45 debate that's going on out there. Were you guys using the SIG 226?
Yep,
that's awesome. I actually have one of those myself. We my advisor team when I was in Afghanistan in 2011 with 3rd Battalion 6th Marines, we did a unit order. I for whatever reason was like, hey, we should do a pistol, and they're like, cool, you can be in charge of it. And so I was in charge of disseminating information to 1,200 people and trying to collect money and track the purchases of firearms, which was not cool. Which is, I was like, I'll never do that again. But it was worth it in the fact that I got a really nice pistol out of it that's engraved and everything like that. But I've shot a ton of rounds out of that pistol. I've never had issues with it.
Yep. Yeah, I liked it a lot. And I carried a 220. A SIG 220 and 45 for a while, and then now. But I'm a big Glock man.
Yeah.
So I love the little plastic guns.
Yeah, yeah, they're not bad. I mean, they're popular for a reason, you know. But it's that kind of gun that's like people either love them or hate them. You know, there's a lot of haters out there for them.
They are.
Yeah. Why did you guys switch from the 9 millimeter to the 10 millimeter MP5s, and what kind of difference did you notice in it, and which one did you prefer?
So I think the Bureau was trying to, at one point, the Bureau actually um, had they were going to a 10 millimeter service pistol.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Um, and that program didn't work out, but the idea was originally to standardize. So you had a 10 millimeter MP5 and, a 10 millimeter handgun. Um, I liked the 10 millimeter MP5. The ballistics on it were really good. In terms of being able to shoot through glass and into cars and things like that. It had some good stopping power. But the M4 is, ideally a better platform, I think. So
Really, you might get hate for that.
uh,
I think
well,
it's because people just a lot of us, myself included, have never even shot an MP5. So for us, we see that and we see like special operations guys using them sometimes, and it's like, oh, that's got to be better. Or it's like, look at this sick looking gun that I've never got to use.
well, I mean, just in the bliss. I mean, a 10 millimeter is a great round for 100 meters and in.
Mm-hmm.
But after 100 meters, it starts losing, because of the size of the bullet and muzzle velocity and ballistics and all that, all that fancy stuff. It loses its effectiveness. So you don't have that
medium range kind of.
Right. Whereas with an M4, you can have a short barrel rifle and it's got some capability for at least everything that you would need in the Bureau. We're not deploying. Well, I didn't say that, but for the most part, we're not deploying out to a place like Afghanistan where you need to really have the ability to reach out and touch somebody. You're operating in an urban environment where the longest shot you're going to make would be 75 to 100 meters.
Yeah. So it makes complete sense to have, an MP5 platform when you're running warrant, stuff like that. Whereas, like you said, in Afghanistan or Iraq or, the fields of fire might be a little bit more open. And you're right. The M4 is completely capable because the Marine Corps still, if you either get issued right now and I'm sure it's probably changing, an M4 or an M16. And then I guess there's some guys that are getting the IAR, and that's what you will qualify on the rifle range. But it doesn't matter if you have the M4 with the short, the 16-inch barrel on it or whatever, or the IAR that's like a souped-up rifle. You both have to go to the same rifle range, and you both have to shoot out to 500 yards. And the M4 still does it. I've shot expert a couple times with the M4. So you're right there. It's definitely a capable weapon in the right hands. Can you kind of talk about? It may seem weird for some people to hear that you have these specialized guys in the FBI and that their dedicated job is to do warrant, putting warrants out there. Can you describe what you consider a high risk warrant and why the FBI would get involved in that? And I don't know if you can talk about any individual cases, but if there's any exciting ones or whatever you want to kind of describe what occurred and why, because right now in the country, we have a debate going on, which obviously, about the over-militarization of law enforcement. And I can see some people's points of view on that, but I also see the law enforcement point of view where it's like, hey, if we don't come in with this ballistic gear or these, whatever, we are putting ourselves at a really great danger serving a warrant to this criminal that, highly likely they're going to try to fight back. So can you kind of talk through that a little bit, like what a high risk warrant situation looks like?
Yeah, I mean, so essentially, when you're doing your op plan, you're looking at the subject, where you're going. Does the individual have a criminal history? Do they have? Do they own firearms? Have they any history of violence? Things of that nature. What's the violation you're going out to arrest them for? So, for a lot of the cases that, when I was on SWAT that we did warrant service on were gang cases. So you're going in with known gang members that have, a history of violence. They're known to possess firearms. Um, you're going after them for, assault with a deadly weapon, murder charges, what have you.
Only federal
Or
charges too, right? You guys only
oh
deal
yeah,
in the federal world. Okay.
yeah, federal charges. Um, and then and so after you're doing the threat assessment, and you're essentially okay. Does this require SWAT? A tactical team that can go in, do a coordinated entry, using, and if it required any specialized tools. So if there's any sort of specialized breaching that needed to be done, anything like that, beyond just kicking a door in with a ram, that might require the use of SWAT.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely have followed the whole debate with the militarization of law enforcement. And you look at recently we just lost 2 FBI agents down in Miami
Yep.
serving a child pornography warrant. And my experience in dealing with those were some of the most dangerous cases that we had to go out on. Oftentimes the subject may not have a criminal history. um, you may not, like down in Miami, they didn't know that the guy had owned any firearms or anything else. But when you're going out to arrest somebody that is engaged in that sort of behavior, um, they're desperate because they realize that their life as they know it is over.
Mm-hmm.
They're in all likelihood they're going to prison for a very, very long time. And when they get to prison, they're not going to be a very popular person,
Mm-hmm.
be a pedophile or a child abuser. So, a lot of the shooting incidents that the bureau's had over the last 5 years or so have been around those types of cases. And down in Miami, if the reports that I've read are to be true, it's like basically the subject saw him coming through a Ring camera, and as they got close to the door, just started firing through the walls and the door
Mm.
with an AR type platform, and you know didn't didn't have a chance really.
Yeah, that was a straight ambush. That's definitely something where I've seen it in the news lately. People since that incident, a couple articles about how some law enforcement agencies aren't big fans of like the Ring cameras and stuff like that. But it's like they're not going to go away. It's like one of those
No.
things. You guys, or not you, but the guys that are still doing the job, it's going to be on them to kind of shift their tactics to be able to work around that and kind of figure out the best way to approach a situation where, because I mean, let's be honest, Ring cameras might be new, but home security cameras aren't anything new. I mean, when I was in high school buying weed from a dude, that dude used to have a camera outside his door. I remember that. It's not like it's a new thing, but yeah, man, that's crazy. There's a lot of people that are against no-knock warrants. Can you give us kind of a pitch for why there is a good reason for no-knock warrants if you support them? If you don't support them, then
Well, I mean the no-knock warrants. It's really case specific. So, for example, if you have an individual that has a bunch of guns and he's got ARs and everything else, do you want to give that individual the opportunity, while you knock on the door and you're waiting in the law says you have to wait an appropriate amount of time, which is you're giving somebody 10 seconds, 10 to 15 seconds, and that can be a very long 10 to 15 seconds to be standing outside of a door,
yeah.
after you've knocked on it, if somebody has the ability to blast through the walls or whatever. So sometimes you want to use that, speed, surprise, violence of action, get through the door, get to the hot spot to get that individual secured as quickly as possible. I think it used to be we'd serve no-knock warrants if there was a potential for the destruction of evidence. So if, say, you're going out to do a search warrant and you thought somebody was cooking crack in a house, you don't want them flushing anything down the toilet or down the sink. So you're trying to get into a place as fast as possible. Um, the tendency to get no-knock warrants for those types of cases, I think, is diminished, um, because what we found is that it is risky doing a no-knock warrant, and because you're going in and it's kicking somebody's door in, and like it has happened, they may think that it's somebody there to do a home invasion or to do a robbery. And that's why if we did a no-knock warrant, in the bureau, it was SWAT, and you had identification. So there was, if you had a shield that had FBI on it, your body armor had FBI on it, you were screaming at the top of your lungs, FBI search warrant, making sure that you identified yourself to the people inside.
I think that's like the in the case of like the Breonna Taylor and stuff like that. I think that's the defense, that her boyfriend was shooting back at the police because they thought it was a home invasion kind of deal. So I totally get that, and I'm a Second Amendment supporter and stuff like that, and I have a lot of friends that are totally against no knock warrants, and I can see both sides. It's I'm playing a political thing, I guess, where I'm not agreeing with anyone, but I can see both sides. Where one, you don't want to give the government the right to just come in someone's home without announcing or saying anything, just show up, because their mistakes do happen. Let's be honest. But at the same time, I also want our FBI or police, SWAT teams, or whoever are going to serve these no knock warrants to be able to do it in the safest way possible for them to be able to come home at night too, because it's not a joke. This is a real job, and it's real people are getting killed and stuff like that. Like it's a like you just mentioned, 2 weeks ago 2 agents were killed, and it's a real fine line you got to walk.
Yeah, and I can't speak for various states, but at least federally, it's, if you wanted a no-knock warrant, it's just not something you ask for and you get. You have to really demonstrate to the judge that issues the warrant that you have a real good reason to request a no-knock warrant, and that if you're not going to get that warrant, that there would be serious threat to life or serious potential for loss of evidence, if you're getting a search warrant.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's just one of those things. It's crazy. I don't know, man. Being on the FBI SWAT sounds like a cool job, though. Like going out and running.
Fun. Yeah.
Oh, I bet the adrenaline was just out of control, especially for some of these. I don't know. Some of these. I don't want to call them missions or cases that you guys would work on. Can you talk about any specific cases that kind of stand out in your mind during your career?
Well, I did. Got to go down to down in North Carolina to look for Eric Rudolph, the Olympic Park bomber. So patrolling through the woods for a couple of months with trackers trying to find him.
Really? Well, yeah. Can you talk about like how were you tracking? Like, there's probably a lot. So I was a kid when this happened. I was a kid when the Olympic Park bombing happened in the 90s. I actually lived in Chattanooga, Tennessee, so I was pretty close to Atlanta. And the whole Olympic thing, being in the U.S. and being in Atlanta, affected us because we all in Chattanooga is like, I think an hour, maybe an hour and a half from Atlanta. So, and for those that don't know, Olympic sport venues aren't all in that one spot. They're spread out all over the place. So it affected Tennessee and Georgia. So we were all very aware that it was happening. And then the Olympic Park bombing happened. Initially, they were thinking that it was that local police officer. I can't remember the gentleman's name. And I'm getting this right, correct?
Yeah.
And then they find out it's this different guy. You guys were like tracking him through the woods for months. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, so Eric Rudolph, he was from the Andrews, North Carolina area, down there along the North Carolina-Georgia border. And I believe it was sometime in the summer, he was wanted, and they were trying to find him. And sometime in the summer, I believe it was 1999 or 2000 time frame, he suddenly popped up and one of the locals residents down there saw him. Um, they reported it to the law enforcement, and so then the FBI went in there. They had HRT on the ground looking for him. They had helicopters up and everything. And then over the course of the summer, they started, and going in the fall, they started rotating different SWAT teams out there. So they would send elements down from your SWAT team, and then you would go out on these small patrols of like 4 or 5 guys, and you'd have a tracker that was a professional man tracker that was from another law enforcement agency. And they were just doing grid searches, looking for signs that he was out there, because he had this area he had grown up in, and they thought he had a number of hides out there and things like that. So that's what we were doing, just going out and getting camoed up, and basically you had your little patrol route for the day, and you'd go and patrol your grid, and then go back at it the next day.
That's so crazy. It's like the classic manhunt, like you'd see on like Fugitive or something from back in the day. That's pretty wild. Were you was your team there when they captured him?
No, so he was captured. I want to say it was after 9/11, sometime in like 2001 or 2002, but he was actually picked up by a local police officer down there. He was dumpster diving behind a supermarket, and the cop just saw him and was like, "Hey, here's some homeless guy, diving into the dumpster." And he started talking to him, and he asked him what his name was, and he said, "I'm Eric Rudolph." And lo and behold, it really was him.
It's crazy that someone can be on the run for that long, because the bombing happened in 93, right? In that
96.
96? Oh, okay. Yeah, 96. Okay. Yeah, it's crazy. So for 5 years, this dude is just kind of wandering around. You would think you guys are obviously taking it seriously. You're sending teams down to do manhunts. The fact that he was still able to get out is crazy.
Yeah, he was responsible for the Olympic Park bombing in 96, and then I believe in 97 or 98 he bombed an abortion clinic in Birmingham. And at that bombing, he had a secondary device that was there that also went off. But he killed a police officer during the second bombing.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, Bureau was after him. He was, for domestic terrorism charges, as well as with the bombing of the abortion clinic. There's a federal charge associated with that, and that was back in the days when we had the Unabomber and Eric Rudolph all running around. And
that's what I was just gonna say. Like the 90s and 80s were kind of like a bombing period in the U.S. There was like, I remember the Oklahoma City bombing happening when I was a kid. I remember the Unabomber, like Ted Kaczynski sending out packages, and like one would pop up and stuff. There's a really good show on, I think it's Netflix or something, that has a kind of recreated of everything happen. I can't remember who all is in it, but it's a really good like video about the Unabomber and kind of how he did his thing. But I imagine when you're out searching for someone that's a known bomber, you guys obviously have to take that into account. Is that something you consider, that maybe he's wearing a bomb? Like if you were to have found him in the woods, what do we do if he's got a bomb on him?
I don't know. That was back before the days of the suicide vest and all that. So I think we were more concerned about, a booby trap or, coming across a tripwire or something like that out there.
Yeah, I bet the stress of just something like that, that's stressful, if you're looking for tripwires and stuff and never knowing what's going to happen when you put your foot down.
But yeah, so, doing that. And then, probably the most fun though was just serving warrants locally in DC, going in on, locking up gangbangers and
what kind of federal charges are high enough to, what kind of federal charges are a gang member getting that's going to justify bringing in a FBI team to serve their warrant?
Well, a lot of them are going to be on racketeering charges. So,
okay,
racketeer, influence, corrupt organization. So, that's RICO is a statute where you can incorporate a bunch of non-federal statutes, so murder, drug trafficking, extortion, assault, weapons charges. All those are RICO predicates, and if you can use that RICO statute, you can get gang members would get a lot of significant amount of time. So, you know, you're talking 20 to 30-year sentences
Mm-hmm.
for gang banging back in the day. And DC had some pretty, it wasn't Bloods and Crips, but they were the neighborhood-based gangs were some pretty violent dudes back in the day.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Unfortunately, there's gangs out here in San Diego. There's actually in the alleyway behind my apartment, some gang tagged up the wall. And then I went to take the trash out, and I looked over, and I'm like, oh, what the fuck? Like some whatever. And then the next day or 2 days later, I took the trash out again or something, and another gang had come over and and crossed it out and put their shit on it. And I'm like, Jesus, where am I living right now? I got this shit happening down here. It's I don't get the gang lifestyle, but I wasn't raised around it. It's different for people, I guess, that were raised in that kind of environment, and some of them use it for different reasons. But I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I would like again. I'm going to shift gears here just a little bit and talk about you were working here in San Diego and stuff, and you talked previously on the last episode, on episode 70, a little bit about how you were working against the cartels and stuff. And earlier in the podcast, we talk about how. Or I asked the question, hey, if you're overseas as an American citizen, does that kind of make it easier for you to not get kidnapped or something like that? And you said no, that kind of puts a target on your back. On the flip side, though, if you're a federal agent working against, these other organizations like cartels and stuff like that, isn't there kind of like a non-verbal agreement that they're not going to attack federal agents because they realize if that happens that it's going to be like a way worse situation for them in the end?
I don't think there's any agreement.
I kind of worded that wrong.
Yeah, no, but I get what you mean. But no, I think they don't want to bring that heat down upon them.
Exactly.
I mean, if you look at what happened, after to the cartels after the DEA agent was killed down in Mexico, in the late 80s. Early 80s down there, and then sort of what was brought on, sort of the hell that was rained down upon them by the U.S. government, that they know better than to do anything like that.
In what ways? Because I'm not 100% sure what you're talking about.
So, okay, now I gotta scratch my mind here, but. Back in the mid '80s, you had a DEA was working the Mexican aspect of the cartels. So this was post Pablo Escobar timeframe, or around the Pablo Escobar timeframe, and the Colombian cartels were actually using the Mexicans to move product from Colombia into the United States. They were the logistics arm of it,
mm-hmm.
And the Mexicans, there was a DEA agent that was down there that ended up, the Mexicans had a very significant marijuana operation down there, but he ended up getting the Mexican government to disrupt that. And it pissed off a lot of people, so they ended up kidnapping him, torturing him, and murdering him. And as a result of that, DEA and the U.S. government went down there and just really raised hell with the Mexican cartels, made their lives really, really miserable for several years. So, they don't want to draw that sort of attention to themselves, because if you kill a U.S. federal agent, it's a big deal. The weight of the U.S. government is going to be coming down on you, and they're going to try to this day, there are people that were involved in that murder back in the 80s. There's still active investigations to find them and bring them to justice.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something that's going to go away and people are going to forget about it. U.S. government has a long memory when it comes to stuff like that.
When you talk about, so if an agent gets killed like that, the U.S. government's going to come down and basically come down hard on them. why, as an outsider looking in, why wouldn't the U.S. government, like if they're really serious about the mission, why aren't they just coming down that hard from the get go?
I think it's you only have the capacity to surge, you know, um, for a limited amount of time. But the thought is, if somebody is willing to do that to a federal agent, then what are they willing to do to a common citizen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That and I mean the problem with the cartels is now, it's like the U.S. government, even as big as is U.S. law enforcement, FBI, DEA, DHS, now ICE. There's only a limited amount of resources, and right now there's more work than they have to go around when it comes to dealing with the cartels.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be a growing issue, and it's shifting. You talk about the marijuana growing back in the '80s, like that was like a big deal. I don't. Do you think that's still like? I can't imagine cannabis is making them the same amount of money like they used to make.
No, I think the legalization of marijuana in a lot of states has actually, made the demand for it in terms of illegal demand. Um, it's gone, it's waned. So there's other stuff that's out there that's far more profitable
Mm-hmm.
for a criminal organization to try to traffic. Especially when you're talking about opioids and meth and things of that nature, synthetic drugs.
Yeah, definitely. And a huge thing here in San Diego is human trafficking. And it's unfortunate that a lot of the news doesn't make it to the national level, but on the local level, you see, weekly, there's like a semi trailer stop full of people, or there's a group of people that were rescued out of a house that they were all being held in. These different things that are occurring down here by the border. I'm sure that's something you were also confronted with when you were working in this area.
Yeah, yeah. In human trafficking, that's really taken off over the last, the profitability of that's taken off over the last 10 years or so.
Yeah.
So,
And I will say that I have been seeing in the news more and more. Again, it seems like local news agencies or regional news agencies talking about successful like raids in areas and stuff like that, getting some of these human traffickers and some of these guys that I guess, I don't know, use them for, I don't know, whatever. They're going to them to go find a prostitute or whatever, doing these big stings and rounding these dudes up. Just the other day, here in San Diego, they arrested 30 guys in one of those stings. So I think that's a good thing. And I think that's the kind of police work that a lot of American citizens like to see. Like not everyone wants to see their buddy get busted for pot, but if you want to arrest a dude for child pornography or human trafficking, like we're all over that.
yeah, I would agree. Yeah, the name I was trying to is Kiki Camarena is the DE agent. He was killed back in 1985.
Okay. Kiki.
He's the only guy I was thinking of.
So you've been a UH-60 pilot, you've been on the FBI SWAT, you've worked bank robberies, which we talked about on the last episode. You've worked, against a cartel, you've done stuff overseas. What is the most dangerous situation that you found yourself in?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. It's all kind of relative.
Yeah,
I mean,
right. I was going to say the same thing. It's all relative, but
yeah. Actually, it was probably as a maintenance officer doing maintenance test flights on aircraft.
really hoping
when I
those maintenance crews are reading the manual.
19-year-old E3s and E4s, doing the work and then going out and then doing test flights afterwards.
And it's not like a jet. You can't eject when things go bad.
No, and it's I was actually when we were doing the UH-60Q project, we would take it around to various, they were doing all sorts of things, testing environments, and so you went out west to one of these where they were checking some of the avionics against microwaves and radars, and what have you. And they had their own test pilot who was actually a graduate of the, Navy test pilot course there. And the idea was that person would fly the profile, and they're not necessarily, they could fly a helicopter, but not necessarily Black Hawk rated. So you would go along as the 60 pilot, just get the thing started and get it in the air and everything else. And then their test pilot would fly the profile. And I had an opportunity one time to do one of those, and the guy came out and he's wearing a parachute. And I was like, he had asked the crew chief to take out the seat cushions and everything else. And it's like, why? And here he comes out and he's wearing a parachute, and it's like, where's mine?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, how much faith do you have in what we're about to go do? That's crazy. What's he gonna do? Yeah. How are you gonna bail out of a 60 though?
Good question. Never had it. I'm glad I never had to find out.
Man. I can't. You probably have to be a special kind of person to go volunteer to be a test pilot, because I'm sure some of the things that those guys are asked to do are insane.
Yeah.
Did you guys have a program for that in the Army? I'm sure you do. And did you ever consider trying out for it?
Well, we had maintenance test pilots. So the Army is differed for other services. As a maintenance officer, you actually went to a school where you learned how to, you learned about maintenance and logistics and everything else, but then you also learned about an aircraft and all the systems, and then you learned how to do all the test flight, profiles afterwards. So if you replaced a transmission or replaced rotor blades or doing max power checks on engines and everything else like that, you would, you knew how to go out and do that.
Yeah.
Perform that flight.
No, yeah, that makes sense. All right, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I want to wrap this up, but I want to give you an opportunity to talk about, if you want to promote your company, the Star Consulting Services.
Yeah, you can go to www.starriskconsulting.com, and just mainly, do all sorts of a number of things, to do some investigative work, due diligence, compliance investigations for corporations and companies, and then security assessments for individuals. Been doing a lot of those lately with everything going on with the protests in the summer and what happened at the Capitol and all that. People are nervous, so do personal and physical security assessments for people. And then once the COVID, it gets safe to travel again, do a lot. Bread and butter is really doing international security work for companies and individuals traveling overseas. So
that sounds like an interesting gig to be in, man. I know a few guys that do security work, and they seem to enjoy it. So I will have the link that you said. It is in the show notes right now, and it will be available in the audio version. So for anyone else, check that out. Make sure to do so. You don't have any social media that you want to put out there, correct?
No.
Okay. And for my listeners, as always, for me, it's at Former Action Guys, at J Kramer Graphics. Both of those are my Instagram pages. Check those out. My website is jkramergraphics.com. I've kind of revamped it a little bit to clean it up some, so that you can see that there's more stuff on there other than just Anglico stuff. So make sure you guys go check that out. There is a Former Action Guys podcast collection on there. So if you want to support the show, do that. And then if you're on Twitter and you want to watch me rant about politics and whatnot, the number 4 MER Action Guys is my handle on Twitter. Rob Saale, always a good time. I appreciate you coming on the show. It's I love having on law enforcement professionals to just talk about their careers and the different things they do. And I think the FBI is obviously a really good option for some guys that are getting out of the military and looking for something else that maybe as fulfilling as the military was for them. I feel like the FBI is probably a good option. I'm sure you would agree with that. And how can, just in general, if someone wants to become an FBI agent, do they just go to usajobs.gov and sign up, or is there a different way to apply?
Yeah, you can look at that. I think there's an FBI.gov. You can look at that, and there's a whole link on how to become a special agent. But there's, the Bureau, I would encourage somebody, if you're interested in becoming an agent, don't necessarily just focus on being an agent. there's ways to get down the agent path where you first do a couple of years as an analyst, an intel analyst first, or as a surveillance specialist, or any other support employee. So, guys that have military skills, MOSs, Bureau is always looking for people, that, know how to do logistics. They know how to do, they've got some surveillance skills. They've got the intel analysis and gathering skills. So you go down that, you get in. Once you get your foot in the door, you're an analyst for a couple of years, and then I raise your hand to be a special agent, and if you qualify, then they'll ship you down to Quantico and go through your 20 weeks of training.
20 weeks of training. Sounds like a good time. Well, I hope some people jump on that opportunity, because I think it would definitely be a cool job. Again, Rob, thanks for coming on, and for everyone out there, thanks for checking out the episode. If you're watching on YouTube right now, make sure to give us a thumbs up on the episode and subscribe. And everyone else, make sure you subscribe. Apple Podcasts, the only platforms that you can leave reviews, so please do so if you're following me on Apple Podcasts. And I guess that's it for today.